Have you ever spent 12 years building every system that keeps a company from collapsing, only to have a new VP call you replaceable? They thought I was just legacy staff, an outdated relic from the past. They didn't know I held the operational keys, the one person the buyer needed most. And on that fateful day, just one wrong sentence in a $185 million boardroom destroyed his career forever. My name is Emma Caldwell, and for 12 years, I was the invisible architect of Vertex Dynamics. Not the kind of architect who designs buildings, the kind who builds the systems that keep a $185 million company breathing: supply chain management, data infrastructure, legal compliance, contract frameworks. I touched it all, shaped it all, made it all work together like clockwork. At 38, I'd become what they call institutional knowledge. It's corporate speak for someone who knows where all the bodies are buried, who remembers why certain decisions were made, who can navigate the labyrinth of legacy systems blindfolded. I wore sensible heels, kept my brown hair in a neat bun, and arrived at 7:30 every morning with the same black coffee from the same coffee shop, predictable, reliable, forgettable, exactly how I liked it. Until Ethan Marlowe walked through our glass doors. He came to us from Nexus Solutions, our biggest competitor, with his Harvard MBA practically glowing on his resume and his Armani suits cut so sharp they could slice through quarterly projections. The board introduced him as our new VP of Strategy at the all-hands meeting on a Tuesday morning in March. He stood at the podium with that particular brand of confidence that only comes from never having failed catastrophically. "Change is coming to Vertex," he announced, his voice carrying that motivational speaker quality that made my skin crawl. "We're going to revolutionize how we operate, bring in fresh blood, new perspectives. Some of you are pioneers who built this company. We honor that, but now it's time to evolve beyond our legacy constraints." His eyes found mine in the crowd when he said legacy. Just for a second, a flicker of something that might have been dismissal. Our first one-on-one meeting happened 3 days later in Conference Room B, the one with the view of the parking garage. He was 15 minutes late, walked in checking his phone, and didn't apologize. "Emma," he said, finally looking up. "Operations Director, right 12 years. "That's correct." He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a piece of outdated equipment. "That's quite a tenure. You must have seen a lot of changes." "I've implemented most of them." A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Right. Well, I've been reviewing our operational structure, and frankly, it's—" He paused, searching for the word. "Quaint, like looking at a museum exhibit. Fascinating from a historical perspective, but not exactly cutting edge." I kept my expression neutral, a skill perfected over countless budget meetings. "Our systems have maintained 98% uptime for the past 5 years. Our compliance record is flawless." Sure. He waved his hand dismissively. "But we're not aiming for functional anymore. We're aiming for revolutionary. I'm bringing in some associates from Nexus, people who understand modern methodology. No offense, but some of the old guard here." He chuckled. "Well, let's just say you're all fossils, valuable fossils, but fossils nonetheless." Fossil, there it was, half joking, half serious, wrapped in that corporate passive aggression that gives you no grounds for an HR complaint. "I see," I said quietly. "Don't worry," he added, already standing to leave. "There'll be a place for everyone in the new structure, probably." That night, I sat in my home office, staring at my laptop screen. 12 years of building, maintaining, protecting, reduced to fossil by someone who couldn't tell the difference between our proprietary database architecture and a WordPress blog. I pulled up our system documentation, the thousands of pages I'd written, the interconnected web of processes that kept Vertex alive. He thought I was replaceable, a relic, legacy staff holding back progress. I opened a new folder on my personal drive and named it Documentation Backup. Then I began copying everything, not just the official documents, but my personal notes, the actual history of every system, every integration, every custom solution I'd built to keep this company from hemorrhaging money. The office culture began shifting within weeks. The break room conversations grew quieter. People who'd been with the company for years started updating their LinkedIn profiles during lunch. Two senior managers, Patricia from procurement and James from quality assurance, were suddenly pursuing other opportunities by the end of the month. The crack in Vertex's foundation was small, barely visible, but I'd built these foundations. I knew exactly where the weak points were, and I knew exactly how much pressure they could take before everything came crashing down. The purge started subtly. Patricia and James were just the beginning. Within 6 weeks, Ethan had systematically removed anyone who might challenge his vision of transformation. Their replacements arrived in waves, young, eager faces from Nexus Solutions, all speaking the same language of disruption and synergy and paradigm shifts. The worst of them was Trent Holloway. Trent became Ethan's right hand, a walking TED Talk with an MBA from Wharton and the depth of a puddle. He threw around terms like blockchain integration and AI-driven optimization, without understanding that our current system couldn't even handle a basic API update without my manual intervention. He wore designer sneakers with his suits. "It's about breaking conventions," he'd say, as if footwear could revolutionize our supply chain. They started scheduling meetings on top of my meetings, creating new processes that contradicted existing ones, dismissing documentation requirements as bureaucratic obstacles. I watched them tear through 12 years of carefully constructed procedures, like children ripping wrapping paper. "Emma, glad I caught you," Ethan said one afternoon, cornering me by the coffee machine. It was 2:45 p.m., and I was refilling my mug with the terrible break room coffee that had sustained me through countless deadlines. "Quick question. These vendor contracts you manage, they're all documented in the shared drive, right? Trent needs access." "The contracts are there," I replied carefully. "But the relationship histories, modification tracking, and compliance notes are in a separate system. I can walk him through." "No need," he cut me off. "Trent's got it covered. He's implementing a new vendor management platform, something from this century." I stirred my coffee slowly. Our current vendors have specific SLA requirements that... Legacy thinking, Emma. He was already walking away. "We need to stop being prisoners of the past." That evening, I stayed late, watching Trent fumble through our vendor database from my desk. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see him pulling up contracts, skimming them without reading the addendums, missing the carefully negotiated clauses that kept us from bleeding money. He deleted 3 critical compliance documents, probably thinking they were duplicates. I restored them from my backup after he left at 6:30 p.m. The kitchen incident happened on a Thursday. I was microwaving leftover pasta when Ethan walked in with 2 board members, giving them the grand tour. They didn't notice me in the corner, invisible as always. "The operational redundancies here are staggering," Ethan was saying. "We have people who've been doing the same job for so long. They've become part of the furniture, legacy glue. I call them holding things together temporarily, but ultimately disposable once we upgrade the infrastructure." One of the board members, Sandra Williams, frowned slightly. "But surely institutional knowledge has value." "Overrated," Ethan replied confidently. "What matters is innovation, fresh perspectives. These old-timers, they resist change. They're comfortable with mediocrity. Take our operations director, for example. Sweet woman, very dedicated. But she still uses Excel spreadsheets for resource planning. In 2024, I used Excel because I'd built custom macros that could process our resource allocation faster than any enterprise software. But explaining that would have required them to understand the underlying architecture. I abandoned my pasta and went back to my desk. That night, I began my real work, not sabotage. That would have been petty, traceable. Instead, I started creating comprehensive documentation of everything, every system, every process, every integration point, every custom solution. But more importantly, I documented every change Ethan and his team were making, every deleted file, every bypassed procedure, every ignored compliance requirement. I tracked access logs showing Trent downloading sensitive data to his personal laptop. I archived emails where Ethan promised vendors terms he had no authority to offer. I recorded every instance where their innovations created security vulnerabilities or compliance risks. The folder grew from documentation backup to operational continuity archive. 15 gigabytes of evidence that the new guard wasn't just incompetent, they were dangerous. But I also did something else. I kept the company running. Every mistake they made, I quietly corrected. Every system they broke, I repaired after hours. Every vendor they alienated, I called personally to smooth things over. I became a ghost in the machine, keeping Vertex alive while they played their power games. They thought I was legacy glue, temporary, replaceable, disposable. They had no idea I wasn't glue at all. I was the entire foundation. And foundations, when removed, take everything above them down. The rumors started as whispers in the elevator, fragments of conversation that stopped when someone from management walked by. By late April, everyone knew Vertex Dynamics was in play. The board had engaged Goldman Sachs. We were being packaged for sale. The number floating around was $185 million. Ethan transformed overnight from corporate revolutionary to deal maestro. He commanded the 20th floor conference room, converting it into what he called the war room. Whiteboards covered every wall, filled with valuations, projections, and EBITDA calculations that Trent pretended to understand. "This is our moment," Ethan announced at an emergency leadership meeting. "Halbrook Capital Partners has expressed serious interest. They're sending a team for due diligence in 3 weeks. I'll be personally managing all documentation." My stomach tightened. Halbrook Capital. I knew that name. "I'll need all department heads to submit their operational reports through Trent," Ethan continued, his eyes sweeping the room but never landing on me. "We're going to present a streamlined narrative, show them a company ready for transformation, not weighed down by," he paused, "outdated processes." After the meeting, I went back to my desk and pulled up a file from 7 years ago. The Meridian acquisition, a deal that almost destroyed us when the buyer discovered our disaster recovery plan was fictional. I'd spent 3 straight days rebuilding it from scratch, creating a comprehensive framework that saved the company from a $50 million penalty clause. The email thread was still there, the appreciation from the board, the personal thank you from someone at the buyer's firm who'd been impressed by the thoroughness of the documentation. Martin Kessler, now senior partner at Halbrook Capital Partners. Ethan had no idea Martin existed, but Martin would remember me. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Ethan's team scrambled to compile due diligence materials, creating glossy presentations that promised synergies and efficiencies they didn't understand. Trent spent 12 hours trying to map our vendor relationships, missing 60% of our critical suppliers, because he didn't know about the subsidiaries and shell companies we used for tax optimization. I watched it all unfold from my desk, staying late every night to fix their mistakes. But this time, I did more than fix. I enhanced. The compliance report Trent submitted was a disaster, missing 3 years of FDA certifications. I rewrote it completely, adding not just the missing certifications, but a detailed remediation history showing how we'd addressed every violation before it became critical. At the bottom, in the signature block, I added my name and title, small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The disaster recovery plan Ethan's team created was 4 pages of buzzwords. I replaced it with my framework, 70 pages of detailed procedures, redundancies, and failover protocols. On page 43, I embedded a case study, the Meridian acquisition, how proper disaster recovery planning had saved $50 million. My name appeared once, in a footnote. The vendor contracts Trent compiled were missing termination clauses, liability caps, and SLA penalties. I reconstructed them all, adding a cover sheet that traced the evolution of our vendor relationships over 12 years. In the metadata, where only someone thorough would look, I embedded my digital signature. But the masterstroke was the operational efficiency report. Ethan had written 15 pages about transformation opportunities and optimization potential. I let him keep his version in the main folder, but in the appendix, I added something else, a comprehensive analysis of our operational costs over the past decade, showing how my systems had saved the company $73 million through automation, integration, and careful vendor management. The report was signed and dated 7 years ago, the same week as the Meridian deal. "Emma," Ethan called out as I was leaving one evening at 8:45 p.m. "You've been staying late, helping with the documentation." "Just ensuring continuity," I replied. He smirked. "That's what I like about you old-timers. Loyal to the end, even when the end is coming." "Every company needs continuity," I said quietly, "even during transitions." "Transitions," he repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, we're definitely transitioning. Some of us to bigger things, others to, well, other things." I smiled politely and left him standing there, master of a universe he didn't understand. The Halbrook team would arrive in 4 days. Ethan thought he was orchestrating a symphony. He didn't realize I'd already written the score. And in every movement, every note, my signature was woven into the melody. Martin Kessler would hear it, I was certain of that. The only question was whether Ethan would recognize the requiem was for him. The Halbrook team arrived on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, 5 people in dark suits, led by Martin Kessler. He looked older than I remembered, silver at the temples now, deeper lines around his eyes, but still carried that quiet intensity that made people lean forward when he spoke. I wasn't invited to the presentation. Instead, I sat at my desk, positioned perfectly to see through the glass walls of the boardroom. Ethan had arranged the seating so he commanded the center, flanked by Trent and 3 other Nexus imports. Our CEO, David Murray, sat to the side, already looking diminished. The presentation began with Ethan's vision deck 40 slides of transformation rhetoric, each transition accompanied by unnecessary animation. Through the glass, I could see Martin's face remain perfectly neutral, his pen unmoving. The younger Halbrook associates typed notes. Martin just watched. At 10:30 a.m., they reached the operational documentation. Trent stood up, fumbling with the clicker, launching into a memorized speech about leveraging synergies and optimizing throughput. Martin opened the physical binder old school, like me, and began flipping through pages. He stopped at page 43 of the disaster recovery plan. From my desk, I watched him read, his finger tracking across the lines. The Meridian case study, his head tilted slightly, recognition. He flipped back to check the authorship, then forward to the footnote. His eyes lifted from the page and scanned the office floor through the glass. "They found me." It was a brief moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, but in that look was a complete conversation. He remembered, he knew, he understood. Martin turned back to the binder, now moving through it differently. Not skimming, but hunting. He found the compliance report signature, the vendor contract metadata, the operational efficiency analysis with its 7-year-old date stamp. Each discovery tightened something in his expression. Ethan, oblivious, kept talking. "Of course, we'll need to optimize our human resources allocation. Some of our legacy staff, they're dedicated, but not exactly aligned with modern practices. We estimate 30% redundancy in operational roles." "Legacy staff," Martin repeated, his voice cutting through Ethan's momentum. "Tell me about them." "Well," Ethan's confidence flickered but held. "They're employees who've been here for extended periods, comfortable with old systems, resistant to change, good people, but," he shrugged, "replaceable. We'll need a team that's hungrier, more innovative." "I see." Martin closed the binder with deliberate slowness. "And the person who created this disaster recovery framework, the one that saved $50 million during the Meridian acquisition, I assume they're part of this legacy staff you're planning to replace." The room went silent. David Murray straightened in his chair. Well, Ethan glanced at Trent, who looked blank. That was before my time. Ancient history. 7 years is ancient. Martin's tone could have frozen Mercury. Interesting perspective for someone presenting a 5-year strategic plan. He stood up, and the other Halbrook associates immediately began packing their materials. "Mr. Marlowe," Martin said, buttoning his jacket. "In my experience, there are 2 types of executives. Those who understand that operational excellence is built on institutional knowledge, and those who learn that lesson too late. The documentation in this binder, the real documentation, not your PowerPoint fiction, was clearly created by someone who understands this company at a molecular level." "We have a strong team," Ethan started. "You have a strong person," Martin corrected. "Someone whose work saved your company $50 million. Someone whose systems have generated $73 million in operational savings. Someone whose name appears in every critical document, even though you've tried to bury it under your buzzwords." He picked up the binder. "We'll continue our due diligence, but I need to be clear about something. Halbrook invests in companies with strong foundations, not houses of cards held together by PowerPoint and promises." Martin walked to the door, then paused. "David," he addressed our CEO directly, "I'd like to meet with your operational team, the real one, the people who actually know how this company runs." His eyes found mine again through the glass. "We're done here," he said, and left. The boardroom erupted the moment the elevator doors closed. Ethan's face cycled through confusion, anger, and fear. Trent looked like he might vomit. David Murray was already pulling up documents on his laptop, his expression darkening with each page. I returned to my spreadsheet, entering numbers with steady hands. The same spreadsheet Ethan had mocked. The one with custom macros that had just processed the real-time implications of what had just happened. In cell K47, the formula calculated the probability of Ethan surviving this deal. 0%. But then, I'd known that answer for weeks. The earthquake started with whispers and ended with screams. Within an hour of Halbrook's departure, the 20th floor was in chaos. Board members materialized from the executive wing, their faces grim. David Murray hadn't left the boardroom. He was still at the table, surrounded by printed documents, his laptop open to multiple screens. Through the glass, I could see him highlighting passages, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to rage. "Emergency leadership meeting, now." The email hit at 12:15 p.m. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. The glass walls told the story. Ethan stood at the head of the table, trying to maintain authority, but his body language had shifted. Defensive now, arms crossed, jaw tight. David Murray wasn't even looking at him, just reading from the documents. $73 million in operational savings. David's voice carried through the walls. 7 years of disaster recovery protocols, vendor relationships dating back a decade. And you didn't know any of this existed. "The documentation was poorly organized," Ethan started. "The documentation was perfect." David slammed his hand on the table. "Martin Kessler just called me directly. Do you understand what that means? He doesn't call CEOs, he has people for that. But he called me to say, and I quote, 'You're about to lose the only person who actually understands your company.'" The blood drained from Trent's face. He opened his laptop, probably trying to find something, anything, to justify their position. But I knew what he'd find. The same mess they'd created over the past 3 months. Now impossible to hide. By 2 p.m., the rumors had evolved into confirmed intelligence. Halbrook had formally paused negotiations pending operational clarification. In M&A speak, that was a death sentence. The deal wasn't dead, but it was on life support, and everyone knew who'd pulled the plug. Sandra Williams from the board cornered me by the elevators at 3:30 p.m. "Emma," she said quietly, "we need to talk. I have the Q3 compliance review at 4. It can wait." Her expression was serious. "How bad is it really?" I considered lying, maintaining the polite fiction that everything was manageable, but Martin had changed the game. The truth was now my weapon. We've lost 3 major vendor relationships that Trent doesn't know about. I said simply, the new contracts he negotiated violate our existing agreements. We're looking at potential penalties of $8 million. The disaster recovery plan they submitted to Halbrook is fiction. We'd fail any actual audit. And the transformation budget Ethan promised, it assumes we can cut operational costs by 40% while increasing output. It's mathematically impossible with our current infrastructure. Sandra's face went pale. Can you fix it? I've been fixing it every night for 3 months, I replied. But I can't fix what they break faster than they break it. Not anymore. Martin Kessler asked for you specifically. She said, name and title. He said he won't proceed without assurance that, how did he put it, the architect remains with the building. The architect, not the fossil, not the legacy glue, the architect. What does Ethan say about that? I asked, though I knew the answer. Sandra's expression hardened. Ethan is no longer leading this discussion. By 5 p.m., the office was electric with tension. Ethan had holed up in his office with Trent and 2 other Nexus imports, their voices carrying through the walls. Sharp, angry, desperate, they were trying to build a counter-narrative, create some explanation that would salvage their position. Then the second email arrived, not from David Murray or the board, from Halbrook directly, copied to the entire board of directors. Following our preliminary review, Halbrook Capital Partners wishes to communicate our continued interest in Vertex Dynamics. Contingent upon operational stability and continuity, we require assurance that key personnel, specifically those responsible for core infrastructure and institutional knowledge, will remain in position post-acquisition. Without this assurance, we cannot proceed. The email was signed by Martin Kessler personally. Attached was a single-page document, a list of critical personnel for operational continuity. My name was at the top. Ethan's was nowhere to be found. I watched through the glass as David Murray walked into Ethan's office with the printed email. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Ethan's face collapse, restructure into anger, then crumble again into something that looked like fear. Trent was already on his phone, probably calling recruiters. The other Nexus imports had stopped pretending to work, their eyes fixed on the drama unfolding in the corner office. At 6:45 p.m., Ethan emerged. He walked past my desk without looking at me, his box of personal items balanced in his arms. The Armani suit that had once cut through projections now looked like an expensive costume on a failed actor. The earthquake was over. The aftershocks would continue for weeks, but the tectonic plates had already shifted. I stayed until 7:30 p.m., finishing the Q3 compliance review that had been postponed. It was perfect, comprehensive, unassailable, like everything else I'd built. The fossil had become the foundation, and everyone could feel the ground moving under their feet. The boardroom at 8 a.m. Wednesday morning was different. The unnecessary slides were gone. The buzzword bingo cards might as well have been burned. Just a mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, and a single sheet of paper in front of me. David Murray sat to my right, Sandra Williams to my left. The entire board was present, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and desperation. Ethan's empty chair had been removed entirely, as if he'd never existed. Emma, David began, his voice careful, measured. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I looked at the paper in front of me. 12 bullet points, handwritten, old school, like Martin would appreciate. These are the systems I personally designed and currently maintain, I said, sliding the paper to the center of the table. Supply chain automation, saving us $3 million annually, vendor relationship management, preventing $8 million in penalties this quarter alone, compliance tracking that's kept us audit clean for 5 years, custom data integration that our entire financial reporting depends on. Board members leaned forward, reading. Someone whispered, Jesus Christ. If I leave, I continued, my voice steady. You have approximately 6 weeks before cascading failures begin. Trent deleted critical documentation. Ethan's team corrupted 3 databases trying to optimize them. The new vendor contracts they signed conflict with existing agreements. We're technically in breach with 4 major suppliers right now. But you can fix this, Sandra asked. I've been fixing it every night for 3 months. I met each of their eyes in turn. But fixing and rebuilding are different things. Halbrook wants to know if Vertex can survive the transition. The honest answer, not without me. The door opened. Martin Kessler entered, followed by 2 Halbrook associates. He'd been waiting outside. We all knew it. The theatrical timing too perfect to be coincidental. My apologies for interrupting, he said, though his tone suggested no apology at all. But I wanted to deliver this message personally. He remained standing, commanding the room without trying. Halbrook is prepared to proceed with the acquisition at the agreed price of $185 million. A pause. However, we have one non-negotiable condition. David shifted in his seat. We're prepared to ensure operational continuity. Not good enough. Martin cut him off. We require Emma Caldwell to be promoted to Chief Operating Officer, reporting directly to the board during the transition and to Halbrook leadership post-acquisition. Full authority over all operational decisions. No interference from existing or future strategic leadership. The room went silent. Coup. Not Director of Operations, Chief Operating Officer. Furthermore, Martin continued, looking directly at me for the first time, we're prepared to offer Miss Caldwell a retention package of $2 million, vested over 2 years, plus performance bonuses tied to successful integration metrics. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, something that had been wound tight for months finally released. That's unprecedented, David managed. So is nearly losing a deal because you let a VP with a PowerPoint fetish almost destroy 12 years of operational excellence? Martin replied coolly, Emma saved you $50 million 7 years ago. According to my analysis, she saved you another $70 million since then. $2 million is a bargain. He pulled out a chair and sat down, the gesture somehow making him more intimidating, not less. Let me be crystal clear, he said. Halbrook invests in people, not just companies. We've identified Miss Caldwell as the critical asset in this acquisition. Without her, there is no deal. Without her in a position of real authority, there is no deal. This is not a negotiation. This is a requirement. Sandra Williams spoke first. Emma, what do you think? For 3 months, I'd been invisible, the fossil, the legacy glue, disposable. Now, 12 board members and one of the most powerful private equity partners in the country waited for my answer. I thought about Ethan's smirk. Loyal to the end, even when the end is coming. He'd been right about one thing. The end had been coming. Just not for me. I'll need to review the written offer, I said calmly. And I have some conditions of my own. Full audit of all changes made in the last quarter. Authority to reverse any operational decisions made without my input. And the right to rebuild my team with people who understand that innovation without foundation is just destruction with a marketing budget. Martin smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. Done, he said simply. Then, to the board. Gentlemen, ladies, you have 24 hours to make this official. I suggest you use that time to figure out how someone was allowed to nearly destroy your company while the person holding it together was called a fossil. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Emma, he said, the Meridian documentation you created saved my client $50 million. I've been hoping to work with you again ever since. Don't let them undervalue you this time. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a vault ceiling. Or maybe a coffin lid. Either way, I wasn't the one being buried. The email went out at 9 a.m. Thursday morning. I watched it hit inboxes across the floor from my new office, the corner one, recently vacated, still smelling faintly of Armani cologne and failed ambition. Subject organizational update, effective immediately. Effective immediately. Ethan Marlowe is no longer with Vertex Dynamics. We thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavors. 23 words, no explanation. No farewell party announcement. No pursuing other opportunities euphemism. Just surgical removal. Clean and final. The second email followed 30 seconds later. We are pleased to announce that Emma Caldwell has been promoted to Chief Operating Officer. Effective immediately, Emma will report directly to the Board of Directors and will have full operational authority during our transition period. Please extend her your complete cooperation and support. I didn't move from my desk. Didn't stand up to acknowledge the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure as heads turned toward my new office. I simply continued reviewing the vendor contracts Trent had butchered, marking each violation with a red pen, old school, thorough. Trent himself appeared in my doorway at 9:45 a.m., his face gray, holding a banker's box. I wanted to apologize. He stammered. I didn't understand. You're right, I interrupted, not looking up from the contracts. You didn't understand. That's why you're leaving. I haven't been terminated. Now I looked up. Check your email. His phone buzzed. His face went from gray to white. But I thought... You thought wrong. I returned to the contracts. Security will escort you out. Leave your laptop and access badges on the desk. He stood there for another moment, perhaps waiting for the kindness I'd shown for 12 years. But that Emma, the invisible one, the helpful one, the one who fixed everything quietly, had been declared a fossil. This Emma, the architect, had no time for demolition crews. By noon, the Nexus imports were gone, resigned, terminated, or suddenly discovering urgent family emergencies. The floor felt different, lighter, like a building after asbestos removal. Patricia from procurement was in my office by 2 p.m. She'd been one of Ethan's first casualties. Told her methods were antiquated. I heard you might be rebuilding the team, she said carefully. I am. Can you start Monday? Her eyes filled with tears. I never thought, yes, absolutely. James from quality assurance was next, then Michael from IT, Sarah from compliance. All the fossils Ethan had pushed aside. Each conversation was brief, professional, but underneath ran a current of vindication. At 4:30 p.m., Martin Kessler called directly. I heard you've been busy, he said without preamble. Good. Halbrook likes decisive leadership. The board signed off on everything. Congratulations, Chief Operating Officer Caldwell. Thank you for your confidence. It's not confidence, he replied. It's recognition. There's a difference. Ethan had confidence. You have competence. After he hung up, I pulled up Ethan's strategic transformation deck, the one he'd been so proud of. 40 slides of revolution and disruption. I moved it to a folder labeled Archive Failed Initiatives. Then I created a new presentation, 3 slides, current state, necessary fixes, timeline. No animations, no buzzwords, just truth. David Murray knocked on my door at 6 p.m. Emma, I owe you an apology. No, I said simply. You don't. You owe me the authority to fix this properly. The apology is just words. The authority is what matters. He nodded slowly. You have it. Complete authority. The board is unanimous. Good. I'll need the Executive Compensation Committee to meet tomorrow. We're restructuring the bonus system, performance-based, not PowerPoint-based. Of course. He turned to leave, then stopped. How did you stay so calm while everything was falling apart? I looked at him directly. I wasn't calm. I was calculating. Every insult, every dismissal, every time someone called me replaceable, I documented it all, not for revenge, but for accuracy. When the time came, I didn't need to argue. The evidence argued for me. Ethan never stood a chance, did he? He had every chance. He chose to see experience as obsolescence. He chose to value disruption over competence. He chose to call me a fossil. I turned back to my monitor. I simply chose to prove that fossils are the evidence of what survived. That evening, as I finally prepared to leave at 8 p.m., I found a bottle of champagne on my desk with a note. From all the fossils, thank you for proving we're actually diamonds. I didn't drink champagne. Too bubbly. Too ceremonial. But I took it home anyway. Evidence of a revolution that happened not with noise and presentations, but with patience and precision. Ethan had promised transformation. He'd delivered it. Just not the way he'd intended. The final Halbrook meeting took place 3 weeks later in the same boardroom where Ethan had promised revolution. This time, I sat at the center of the table, my laptop closed, a single portfolio in front of me. Martin Kessler entered with his full team. 5 associates who'd spent weeks examining every detail of our operations. He sat directly across from me, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Miss Caldwell," he began formally, though his eyes held warmth. "Our due diligence is complete. We're prepared to proceed with the acquisition at the full price of $185 million. David Murray exhaled audibly. Sandra Williams allowed herself a small smile. "However," Martin continued, his eyes never leaving mine, "we have one final question. During our review, we discovered something interesting. Every critical system, every major cost-saving initiative, every compliance framework, they all trace back to you. The company's entire operational architecture is essentially your creation." He leaned forward slightly. "So my question is this: how did someone with that much real power allow themselves to be called replaceable?" The room went quiet. It was the question no one had dared to ask. I opened my portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper, my original employment contract from 12 years ago. "Power and authority aren't the same thing," I said. "Ethan had authority. He could hire, fire, make grand pronouncements. But power, real power, is understanding how things actually work. It's knowing that when you remove a foundation, everything above it collapses." I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. I let him call me replaceable because I knew the truth would be more devastating than any argument. I let him think I was a fossil because fossils are proof of survival. I stayed silent not from weakness, but from strategy. Every insult was a data point. Every dismissal was evidence. Every legacy staff comment was another nail in a coffin he was building for himself. Martin nodded slowly. "The long game." "The only game that matters," I replied. Ethan played for quick wins and buzzword victories. I played for the moment when reality would assert itself. That moment was always going to come. I just had to make sure I was still standing when it did. I stood up, walked to the window that overlooked the parking garage. The same view from Conference Room B, where Ethan had first called me a fossil. He asked me once if I'd seen a lot of changes in my 12 years here. I told him I'd implemented most of them. What I didn't tell him was that I'd also survived them all. Every new VP with a transformation agenda, every consultant with a revolutionary framework, every disruptor who thought experience was weakness. I turned back to face them. They all made the same mistake. They confused quiet competence with weakness. They mistook silence for submission. They thought that because I didn't fight back immediately, I couldn't fight at all. Martin stood as well, extending his hand across the table. "Welcome to Halbrook, Chief Operating Officer Caldwell. I have a feeling this acquisition is going to exceed all our projections." As we shook hands, he added quietly, "By the way, I heard Ethan took a position with a startup in Silicon Valley. They're calling him a transformation catalyst." "I hope he learned something," I said. "Doubtful," Martin replied. "But then again, some people are meant to be examples, not success stories." Later that evening, I stood in my office, my real office now, not inherited or borrowed but earned. The building was quiet. Most employees gone home to celebrate the news of the acquisition and their secured futures. I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder I'd created months ago. Documentation backup. Inside were gigabytes of evidence, preparations, contingencies. All of it could be deleted now. The war was over. But I didn't delete it. Instead, I renamed it Architectural Blueprints. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really was. It was about proving a simple truth in a world obsessed with disruption and transformation. The person who actually knows how things work will always be the last one standing. I pulled up our operational dashboard and updated the status of our largest initiative, the one I'd been tracking for 3 months. Project Fossil. Status complete. Turns out, when pressure and time are applied correctly, fossils don't just survive. They become diamonds. And diamonds, they're forever. Even Ethan, with all his buzzwords and PowerPoint slides, couldn't argue with that. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect. If this tale of corporate justice resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about workplace dynamics. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove your true worth? Let me know in the comments below.